In 2018, the major infrastructure project, Pont Samuel de Champlain, was nearing completion, and the renders of the new transit system crossing the bridge drew a lot of attention, including the surging CAQ political party.
Bonjour tout le monde.
2018 was an election year, and Jean-François Roberge was on the campaign trail in Chambly, an off-island exurb southwest of Montreal. The governing Liberal Party had held power for the majority of the last 2 decades, and under them, the Quebec Pension Fund, or CASE, had embarked on building the REM, which, being centred on Montreal, ended up connecting a lot of ridings that voted Team Red. It seemed to the CAQ it was time to talk about running this magical, rapidly progressing train into their swinging heartlands. The 30,000 residents of the small town nestled next to their namesake river basin were made the pork barrel promise of the political season as their representative Jean-François stepped up to the microphone at a campaign stop and proclaimed, "Dès notre premier mandat, les rails du REM seront installés pour desservir Chambly." The case was now dealing with the first of many political meddling moments. For the case's public-public partnership to work, the numbers still had to make sense, and with a population of 3 cows and 2 chickens, Chambly put them in a very awkward spot. Because the Quebec government gives billions of favourable financing support to the case, so when they ask, "Hey, look into this," the case are obliged. It's polite, and those leads are formally the way that they are supposed to investigate these new projects. But are they actually forced to do what a politician yells at 2 bored reporters in a hardware store car park?
Booyah.
There's not enough room for the both of us. Look, if you ever calling me, call me number one. Oops, I did it again, about to double up. Look, up here, definition of a leveled up. All my celebrations always been premeditated, always been a step ahead. That's why you finish seconds later. Difference between us, I go back to back, you back to basics. These are facts you face, and I'm just saying you were dealing with them.
Look at it, it's turning light blue.
The original REM came from the government requesting the case look into an airport connection and a South Shore connection. The case took it and, well, ran with it would be an understatement. Prescribing exactly what to build is a big problem with existing projects under P3s and the regular old contract-to-build model. By empowering the case to think big picture about the problem, they find efficiencies and opportunities that they wouldn't have if it was a prescriptive old-style, build this station here. We want the frequency to be exactly this. You have to use this sort of train. But these ridings-based demands are a potential issue for getting decent projects in the first place. In our electoral system, suburban swing ridings are squeaky wheels to politicians and subsequently get more grease. But that becomes a big problem for something like public transportation. Public transit, by default, operates on the population-based reality of the world. Maybe in our warped electoral system, land does vote, but it sure as hell doesn't ride the train. So the case started doing their due diligence, but suspected the small population of car-centric Chambly would not cover the costs of the line. Meanwhile, the CAQ were at it again, saying they would force the case to purchase trains from Bombardier, something that many, if not virtually all, previous transit projects have been required to do in Montreal, without really asking, can they actually deliver on this? Switching to Bombardier trains would have set the project back years. Bombardier makes good equipment, but they've been just awful at delivering on time in the decade leading up to the project. And Alstom were good to go. When Bombardier delivered the Azur trains or Toronto streetcars late, at least the systems had aging but functioning vehicles. For the REM, there was no interim solution. We almost certainly were looking at having an empty track, not earning any revenue, with much less time to iron out the bugs on the brand new system. They needed the vehicles years ahead of opening. No train in 2020, no REM in 2022. The case owned a lot of Bombardier and it still decided that Alstom trains were the right choice. These political demands have always muddled the mandate of existing transit agencies. They have to be thinking about political implications rather than what the best tool is for the job. Oh, let's build a transit line, and also we have to buy a kind of crappy shovel that will slow us down because the shovel lobby is big, and we have to run it to a place that happens to have the right people living in it for the politicians to care about them, even though there is a transit-starved neighborhood just over there with a higher population. The CAQ was campaigning with exactly this sort of naive political interference that causes so many cost overruns in other transit projects. But in both cases, the government got a
Hard no.
Oh, come on, where's your jam, bud?
Chambly got rejected, and the amount of time it took someone at the case to type 30,000 and
Telling me's dreaming.
Bombardier Transportation got bought by Alstom anyway, but the big picture is the case and the deal kind of ended up buying Alstom. They're now a large shareholder in Alstom. The local manufacturing facilities are staying, but it's now inside a legitimately successful entity with significant Quebec ownership. It's not a petty purchase like it would have been. And those trains, they arrived ahead of schedule and with enough time to fix the flaws that these large infrastructure projects inevitably have. So sure, the case benefit from their close relationship with government, but the thing is, they're still independent. The new Premier, François Legault, publicly lamented, "Why did the Liberals legislate in 2015 that the case acts with full independence in accordance with the Act, rather than do things that I want?" But he hasn't changed the legislation, and that's good. Most of the ideas that politicians come up with are really shitty. Seeing the case, filtering through them, and finding the reasonable ones shows the model working perfectly. Perhaps the most deeply satisfying thing is seeing new governments come in at both the municipal and provincial level mid-project, and the project not get cancelled or contorted. Because the case is pre-filtering out irrational projects that are going to make the system cost too much or place land ahead of people, it helps address the stability issue that our majoritarian governments in North America often produce. Imagine that the CAQ route to Chambly to win that riding had been approved. Well, the next Liberal government that got in probably would have looked at it, its outrageous cost, how it only serves the voter base of their political opposition, and cancelled it, probably in favour of a project that served one of their swing ridings. The case also reduces these projects' exposure to politicians by reducing the amount of cash down the government pays. In the initial REM project pitch, instead of needing $6.3 billion, it only needed $2.6 billion from the government, which first of all draws less heat, and second of all, if there is a change of policy at the federal or provincial level and funding does get pulled, the project has a decent chance of still being able to find someone to chip in for the rest of the money. I mean, what's $1 billion, right? Finally, when there are cost overruns, as there always are in infrastructure projects, instead of putting things on hold and waiting for the government to approve extra funding, which often involves meddling with the project, these costs are just eaten by the case, and they have. Costs have gone up to $6.9 billion for the REM, but the case has covered all of them to keep things moving at full speed. Beyond financing, the other stabilizing factor is just having a third party that is motivated to see the project finished on time.
You're at Quincy's! Any Quincy's? You're at Quincy's. No, any Quincy's, no Startsies. You can't do that! Guys!
Fellas.
Delayed opening costs the case money. Right now, there are no riders, and every day they have to service billions of dollars of loans. So when one government leaves and another government comes in, there is a constant advocate that is there to push the project through. It's not a pet project of one government or one premier that gets dropped. The case is an institution that is accountable to Quebec's taxpayers. And we want them to keep succeeding because if they don't, our retirements will be fucked up. The case is helping to solve a chronic problem in North America, our unstable, policy-lurching first-past-the-post governments. I hate our electoral system so much, but this is our reality. And it's a pretty good solution that only gets better with a more stable government. New Zealand or Germany would be better off if they had an entity like the case building out their infrastructure projects. For mega projects that take decades to complete, governments with radically different ideas for transport are a serious problem. Politicians like to cut ribbons, but there is no ribbon to be cut on years 4 to 9 of a 15-year infrastructure project. It's a thankless task. You won't be there when it opens, and it wasn't even your idea. Quebec politicians make noise. We're gonna tell them to blah, blah, blah. But behind the scenes, the case has been a very steady hand, not as buffeted around by the political winds as many local commentators like to pretend. But for the case, the Chambly extension was just the start of their political problems. There was another request made to look into serving a different CAQ voter base in Montreal's long-neglected East. And this one had a much better business case, provided they could get creative with what exactly East meant. and all those viaducts going up down highways in the West Island hadn't gone unnoticed. For some, a wave of joy hit them. Go Canada! We can build things after all. But all was not good, as opposition began to solidify, and the heavyweights, the destroyers of infrastructure projects around the world, finally arrived on the scene, ready to fight.